and welcome to another hot day in Colorado Springs. I think I saw it's going to hit almost 100 degrees. So for wherever you are, I hope that you are staying cool as I am. I've got a nice air conditioner at my feet. So anyways, so thank you again for joining us. Today we are covering part 3 of our 6-part mental health series with Diversus Health, sponsored by David Commercial Real Estate. So we're very excited for you to be here. If you missed the first 2 parts, we have them on our website. If you go to pikespeaksbdc.org, you can find them there. Or you can go to Facebook and look at our videos as this is a live recording and then we keep it recorded, or you can reach out to the SBDC at any point and we will have that ready for you. So before we get started here, one, I want to say thank you to David Commercial Real Estate for sponsoring this. They do an amazing job over there doing commercial real estate. So a huge applause to David Commercial for providing this incredible education to our small businesses here in El Paso and Teller County. And again, before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the Pikes Peak Small Business Development Center. My name is Mackenzie Tamayo, and I'm the COVID-19 Program Manager for the SBDC. And what the SBDC does is we provide free consulting, practical training, and business resources and business recovery and continuity for our small businesses here in El Paso and Teller County. You can head to pikespeaksbdc.org to learn more and get more information. And if you have any additional questions, we can't do any of this without our local sponsors. We've got El Paso County and Business Banking, the City of Colorado Springs, Park City Bank and Trust, Colorado Springs Utilities, Vectra Bank, and the SBA. I've got 2 amazing women here today that I'm excited to tell you a little bit about. And before they kind of dive into what they're going to be discussing today in the presentation, I'd like to tell you a little bit about them. So today we've got Haley Greeno. She's a licensed professional counselor on the Colorado Spirit team at Diversus Health. Prior to her involvement with this team, she was a full-time clinician with Diversus Health. She's experienced in building rapport with clients and supporting them with issues such as trauma, depression, and anxiety. And she uses her clinical skills to help inform, equip, and support our community about resiliency and coping skills. She's passionate about supporting others on their journey towards greater health, happiness, and discovery of their authentic selves. She has several family members who own and operate their own businesses and has seen the challenges they have faced over the last 1.5 years. And she is hopeful to provide support to our small business community. We also have Ann Golia as the Senior Community Outreach Coordinator on the Colorado Spirit team as well. Ann has a BA in psychology and has worked with diverse populations, including at-risk teenagers in residential facilities in Colorado Springs and in Pueblo. And before joining the team, she worked as an educational specialist at Diversus Health, help clients prepare for and pass their GED examinations. She loves to see clients succeed and is always happy when they pass the GED exam, allowing them to move forward towards higher education, employment, or personal goals. Anne is a veteran, thank you for your service, and is a spouse of a soldier. So a wealth of knowledge between the 2 of you. Thank you so much for being here today as we discuss part 3 of our 6-part series. And while I'm getting that set up, Anne and Haley, can you tell us a little bit more about Diversus and some of the teams that you all are building?
Yeah, so Diversus Health used to be Aspen Point, so some people might be more familiar with Aspen Point. So went through a name change earlier this year, really aimed at serving the Colorado Springs community and some of the rural communities in mental health needs, along with case management and other services, trying to get people just support that they need. So really trying to cater to the community and focusing on mental health for those who need it around us. So those are, and then Ann and I are a part of the Colorado Spirit team, which is it's a FEMA funded program, the crisis counseling program. So we came together in response to COVID to help provide for mental health needs that came about out of COVID-19.
That's amazing. I'm trying to pull this up really quick. And just worked for me. So 1 second.
No problem. And I know Ann was also a part of the education team at Diversus. And was
Ann, tell us a little bit about yourself and about what you've been doing.
Okay. So I've been with Aspen Point Diversus Health for 12 years. I started out just as a GED examiner in the education program, kind of watched it blossom into when we moved to where it's all computer-based now. Just really got a lot of joy out of watching the kids come from the education department down to me for testing, and they would pass those tests. And it's just been a big growing process for me. I've seen Aspen Point going through a lot of changes, Diversus Health go through a lot of changes over the years, and it's been good. And I've enjoyed myself, learned a lot, met a lot of great people, and just continuing to enjoy and see where my journey takes me.
That's great. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so appreciative. So I've got it up. Can you see it okay?
Yep.
Awesome. We'll take it away, and then you just let me know when you need me to change the slide, okay?
Great, will do. So yeah, today we're going to talk about life-work or work-life balance. You'll see it both ways, kind of talking about what it is and tips for how to get it. So we'll be talking about some overall, like how to get work-life balance, and then some skills that might be helpful along the way. And so for the next slide, we're going to start out with a mindfulness practice. So if you're with us live and are able to, this is just going to be a couple minutes practice, just to slow down a little bit, to get into the moment, and to check in to see, as we get started, if you can kind of notice where there might be some imbalance with work and life at this point in your journey. So get as comfortable as you can wherever you are. Hopefully you are able to sit where you feel supported. And if you'd like, you're welcome to close your eyes or just kind of have a soft gaze right in front of you. And then just notice thoughts, bring attention to your thoughts as they come in and out of your mind. And then see if you can draw attention to your breath. Noticing what it feels like to breathe in and to breathe out. And to breathe in and to breathe out. And once you've kind of settled into this breath a little bit, ask yourself internally, how can I be more balanced? Or maybe, how would I like my life to be more balanced? Or maybe even ask what feels out of balance.
Hello?
And you can continue to ask yourself some of those questions. And each time you do, notice what kind of thoughts come into your mind first. And as best you can, notice these thoughts without judgment. And then as best you can, let those thoughts drift away. Relax your mind and body by noticing your breath coming in and flowing out. And once you're satisfied with the information you've received on how your life could be more balanced, really focus back in on your breath, breathing in and out. And if your eyes are closed, you can open your eyes and bring your attention back to this moment and to this presentation. And so that exercise really just pairs some mindful breathing and then introducing the topic of balance. And we'll talk about it later, but it's important to kind of check in with yourself to see where you're at with that idea of balance and where you feel like you're at with work life. And so we go to the next slide. and even just want to open it up to talk a little bit about work-life balance. We've just come out of a year that threw the whole world out of balance. So here, I'd like to give those listening a chance to check in with themselves of how COVID has affected their work-life balance. For some people, it made life much more difficult for finding balance. And in others, it might have actually helped that they were able to live a life that felt more in line with their values and priorities. So I wanted to check in with Mackenzie and Anne and just hear what you've heard about or from interactions with business owners, what they've talked to as far as work-life balance, especially in relation to COVID over the last year and a half.
I think one of the more difficult pieces is, I think even before the pandemic, there was an issue with work-life balance. And so I think as we were all at home, because we all had to be at home, and most, almost all of us were working from home, especially kind of in the corporate world, what that translated to was now we're forced at home and with work, and we don't know how to do either one of those things together. And so we've had to learn kind of new practices. And as we kind of go back into the workforce post-pandemic, then how do we, essentially do that after a pandemic, plus kind of what we've needed to do beforehand. So I think there's this interesting marriage of pre-pandemic, not understanding, work-life balance, and post-pandemic, work-life balance. So it's how do we take kind of those two things and say, we understand a lot of you have been home for a year. A lot of you have been struggling with your own, mental health in ways that you've never had to do before, homeschooling children, a lot of us, learning how to set up, our own little desks when there's things happening and, all those types of things. So I think to answer the first question, thoughtfully is to say, I think we've learned what doesn't work and what we don't want to go back to. And as we kind of enter into seeing, people again, and kind of the anxiety that comes with that, not just physically, but also mentally, how we can kind of say, like, I want to be very cognizant that the space that I enter into, even my workspace, just like my bedroom, just like my kitchen, just like any space that I come into, is like peaceful and is mindful, like you had just mentioned. So for me, I think I've just been so cognizant of mindfulness in my workspace.
For me, I've just been trying, because, we have been at home for a year, and at least a year. And for me, at first, it was like, I've got to keep busy. I've got to keep busy. I've got to keep busy. And I would be, doing things for like 2 days ahead. And then I just would get myself so exhausted by the end of the day. And then as I got more adjusted to being at home, I just would be like, okay, I get off at this time. I'm going to shut off my work phone, close my computer, and I'm going to leave the room that I have everything in there. And I won't go back in there until the next morning, because I just needed that break. And then I would instantly say hi to my husband and then go for a walk, just to clear my head of the day, and just to be I'm like very purposeful and deliberate about my workday is over and I need to separate it from my personal life.
Yeah, and those are some great things, some great boundaries you put in place, Anne, that we'll be talking about a little bit later too. And Mackenzie, that's a great point, is now that there's the opportunity to go back to work for a lot of people, is getting to decide again what you want that to look like. And so hopefully this will help give some structure to how to make that happen. Also, something I think you touched on too is there can be a lot of anxiety with change. And so that's something, just for those who are listening, we're going to touch on in a later presentation about what it's going to be like going back to work. Because just like we had anxiety about working from home and what that looks like, there might be a lot of anxiety about going back to work in a physical location. So we will be touching on that in a different presentation that I think will be helpful for a lot of people. So for those of you who are listening, I think it's important to start to begin thinking and imagining what you want your own balance to look like as we as a society go back to, or move forward to what life is going to look like. And so for the next slide, I think it's important to even just define, like, what even is work-life balance? because I think there's a lot of myths out there, and it's much more complex than trying to figure out how many hours to spend at work and how many hours to spend at home. So hopefully we can talk about some of these myths to broaden the scope about what work-life balance is, that can really open it up for some more creativity when you're trying to figure out what you want and what really works best for you. One of the myths is that it has to be black and white, that it's about work and the rest of your life, which is really black and white thinking, which really puts us into a corner. But realistically, it's not that cut and dry. Thinking about it this way can cause guilt and shame when you choose work, when work isn't necessarily the enemy. Work is part of our life and hopefully something you enjoy, and it's not the bad guy. So we're trying to figure out what works best for you, and it's more complex than putting your whole life against work or something like that. Another myth is that balance is all about time management. And it's true that time management is an important component to finding balance in your life. But there's other factors, such as identifying priorities, being flexible, that have a huge impact on your life satisfaction. Heather Mulder, who wrote the article that I'm referencing on this slide, reminds us that our culture, specifically in the West, is really obsessed with time, and sometimes we feel oppressed by it. So remembering that and finding balance is about being intentional without feeling oppressed by the clock or the calendar. The third myth, I've heard some people say that if you're looking for balance, you're not really committed enough to progress in your career, and you might not really want it that bad. And again, we're back to that black and white thinking, assuming that we have to be all work to be successful in your career. And that's not necessarily true. This website that I'm referencing with Heather Mulder, she was a lawyer and had a lot of success when she was able to set boundaries. And that's the next myth, is boundaries will hurt your career. But boundaries are actually an incredibly helpful tool for us and help us to stay focused on our priorities and to help keep us healthy. And when we have no boundaries, especially around work, we often feel overworked, tired. We're more likely to make mistakes that could be more costly to our businesses and to our consumers. And then the last myth, work-life balance is one size fits all, and it's definitely not. You will not necessarily find balance the way that your neighbor does. Your business is different, your family is different, your priorities might be very different. So it's really about finding what's important to you. And that's going to take some reflection and introspection if this is an area that you'd really like to work on. But comparison is not our friend, and it is definitely not one size fits all here. And so one of the factors that kind of plays into that is that the idea of work-life balance has changed throughout the years. And one of the contributing factors is the different generations that have come through. If we look at the baby boomers, most of them were born during wartime or shortly thereafter, saw the struggle for stability. And so they really valued their jobs and tend to be very loyal employees. But that also came with a cost. Because they were so focused on stability, a lot of them reported high levels of stress and dissatisfaction with their work. So then came Gen X, who saw the work ethic of their parents, but also the high costs that it brought to the home life. And so they saw the drawbacks of just that kind of grin and bear it, get it done. You do your 9 to 5, you just do your time. And they began to prioritize connections and life outside of work. So this is where we start to see that transition to emphasizing a little bit more focus on family and interests outside of work. And so this generation was more likely to use their PTO than baby boomers. And then most recently, we see the millennials where there's continues this shift where some prioritize their lifestyle and finding a career that will help support their lifestyle. They also struggle with the highest student loan debts, very high financial stress, as well as supporting families. So we can see kind of the shift, starting in this presentation anyway, with the baby boomers and how this emphasis on focusing on time outside of work has shifted over time. So not every one of your employees is going to see balance the same. It certainly has changed throughout the years. And there may be some in older generations who are driven by their work ethic and desire to provide versus finding balance and finding time for interests outside of work. So there's been lots of shifts in generations with priorities, identity, and work. And so to think about that for yourself, your own generational influence and your employees, that there's going to be a lot of different, balance is going to look vastly different for different people. So even, we'll talk a little bit later, but even in thinking about your employees, remembering that even their age and their generation can impact their desire or priority for balance. And so I think this is probably something most people can relate to, but it's important to put some language on how to recognize when you're out of balance. And so there's some behaviors and feelings specifically that might be a sign that there's some work-life imbalance that might need some attention. So one of them is feeling unfulfilled. So this will often show up as feeling unmotivated, maybe stuck or bored, kind of maybe some apathy towards work. You might also recognize that you're trying to do all things and be all people, or to do and be all things for all people. So oftentimes when this is a factor, you might feel out of control, feeling consistently fatigued, overwhelmed, and pretty stretched thin. So this is sometimes called the disease to please, and often looks like having difficulty saying no to questions or opportunities. Another one is living a life of shoulds. This is when you consistently wonder what you should be doing, or after making a decision, wondering if you should have done it differently. So this can lead to a lot of insecurity about your own decisions. This also might be kind of a sign of burnout, that feeling of indecision, not feeling like you're in control. And you might even feel some resentment because you're trying to live up to other people's expectations rather than your own. And then another one is poor boundaries. So, that can go kind of a couple ways. One of them being that if you prioritize everything, when all tasks and all people become a priority, it feels a lot like you're running around and you don't know where to start or what to do, feeling like you always have a lot on your plate. And the thing is, if you make everything your top priority, then you don't really have any priorities. So poor boundaries can really come into play and really throw us off balance, because it's like having a ton of spinning plates in the air. And when you just have too many, you get so tired of keeping them all up there, and eventually some of them are going to fall. But something to keep in mind is that we're coming out of an unprecedented year full of situations that we were not prepared for and we had to cope with on the fly. So some of these signs of imbalance, talk with a friend about, or a therapist, or someone you trust about how the pandemic has impacted these areas. The pandemic may have brought about some of the additional roles like teacher and caregiver, or even additional jobs. So as we may start shifting back into life as it used to be, some of these stressors might decrease on their own, and you might notice some of these things improving on their own. But in general, when we're talking just work-life balance, these are some helpful things to keep an eye on. So then we've identified, okay, I have some issues with work-life balance. What do we do next? Which can feel like a daunting task. So here are some steps to follow that can really be helpful in helping figure out what's going to work best for you. And again, work-life balance, it is not a one-size-fits-all. So as we go through these ideas and recommendations, figure out what works best for you and your circumstances in life at this point. Because oftentimes work-life balance is going to change and it's not going to stay the same. So the first step for finding balance and flexibility is to recognize and acknowledge that there's a lack of balance, is to get out of that space of denial, but to call it for what it is. And sometimes that's the hardest part, especially when we're worried about finances or worried about customers or our business. But it's important to recognize when there's an imbalance and when you're suffering because of it. So when things are feeling out of whack, one of the first things to do is to ground yourself by coming back to the basics, mainly your health. Make sure you're sleeping, make sure you're eating, and if you can, eat healthy, a little on the healthier side. Make sure you're drinking water or other hydrating things that aren't coffee. And make sure you're having some social connections for pleasure. Oftentimes we can get wrapped up in what we're doing, but really coming back to the basics and focusing on your health and some of these simple things can really help shift how you're feeling physically and mentally, and then can even help clear some headspace as you want to start thinking more, okay, well, how did I get to this out of balance place and how can I get back in balance? So really start back with the basics. So after you recognize that there's an issue, it's an invitation really to take a step back and think about the things that are really important to you. And Mackenzie, you kind of referenced that earlier, like as we were forced to kind of take a step back from whatever our day-to-day hustle and bustle was, we may have had the chance to kind of identify what's really important to us, what helps bring our life meaning. So think about, what is life giving to you? Time with family or friends, providing for your family, or contributing to family finances, time for hobbies and health. And it's okay if all of these are really important to you, but what you're looking for is which values are life-giving and which ones seem like a chore, because we really want to do work on balancing those, because we all have to do things to get things done, and sometimes it's things we don't want to do, but we want to find more balance in our lives. So really thinking about which activities for me are life-giving, which ones are a little bit more soul-sucking. And so taking a look, take a step back, kind of reevaluate, look at your values, priorities. And then if you really want to, something that can be really helpful is to take a step back and look at, well, what does success mean to me? Is it that I have this amount of money in the bank? Is it that I get to interact with customers or make people happy? But what do things like success and prosperity mean? Taking the time to define some of those things will also help clarify some of your priorities and can help breathe life back into what you like doing. It does take a little bit more work to kind of sit down and think about what those things mean to you, but can be really grounding and really help give some direction. And so this last year, it required that we shift and bend with new regulations and requirements and new roles. So as we move forward in this post-pandemic life, it is a chance to take a step back, recenter, and reprioritize. Like I said, there's probably going to be some anxiety in reprioritizing after a trauma, which is what the pandemic was for us. We've been living in survival mode for a really long time, where we've had to put safety and security and finances as our priority for survival. So there might come there might be some anxiety that comes along with this reprioritizing or kind of rethinking how you want to re-engage. So know that that's a normal part of this shift as our nervous system starts to kind of calm down a little bit. But that might be a part of that reprioritizing or kind of refiguring out which direction you want to do or go. And then after you reprioritize, if you decide that you want to make some changes, it's definitely best to start small and reasonable. We're much more likely to stick to new habits if they're reasonable and doable. So we don't want to make huge overhauls that lead to more feelings of overwhelm and just like another thing we have to do. And sometimes a really good way to think about it is to think about your end goal and work your way backwards. So if part of work-life balance, you find like interacting with customers is actually really life-giving to you. So part of your goal is to spend more time with customers versus just the admin side, which might be one of those things that's kind of soul-sucking, but we got to do it. So you start and you ask yourself, okay, well, what would need to happen so I get to spend more time with customers or whatever it is that I like doing in my job? So I would need to get all that admin things done at the end of the day so I can be with customers. So then what would need to happen to get all those things done by the end of the day? Well, I would need to update my organization system so I can get it done quicker. Okay, so what do you need to do to organize your admin system? And so you just keep working your way back until you get to the very smallest first step. And then you keep working up to your goal that you want to work towards. So start small and just take it step by step to the goals that you're hoping for.
I always say, Haley, I always say too that you just start simply, but simply start. Like there's something so like powerful about just simply start. That's all. Like you don't have to like actually have a huge roadmap. Sometimes it's just like take the next one step and that's all you know to do today, and then do the next step tomorrow. Because I think we get so preoccupied that if we don't have our full plan, or it's like anything we do, right? I feel like in a trauma too, as therapists, like oftentimes people work in extremes, and so it's very black and white. And so finding that kind of middle place to say, I don't need to change everything about my diet, but maybe I just drink more water today. And that's all. And then just start simply. And then maybe tomorrow we do something else, or maybe in a month. So that to me has always been really helpful. And something that's helped me too is, saying yes to one thing and then no to something, and that's all. I'm going to say yes to more water and no to staying up past 10. And then that's my healthy boundary for, the week. So, and then just kind of adding on to those, I think can just be like small, tangible ways to just see a difference over, a long period of time.
Yes, that's really great, Mackenzie. I like that a lot. As well as letting yourself enjoy those small steps. So if your end goal is something healthy or something like that, and you had a day where you drank water, give yourself credit for that. We got to enjoy those each steps we take. So I really like that. That's really great. And then the last part on that last slide, oh no, I think we covered all that, is just to be flexible with yourself, to not expect perfection. Rarely does growth and change happen in a straight line. So each time you try something and it doesn't go to plan, that's actually really just a learning opportunity, and you tweak your plan and try it again. So it's all about how we frame the picture. So keep trying and work towards your goal. And you're going to learn what works best for you along the way, as long as you start. Kind of like what you said, Mackenzie. You got to get started, and you're going to learn what works for you along the way. So we're going to kind of shift now into skills that are really going to be helpful in working towards balance. And I think one of the most powerful skills, kind of generally, that also plays into balance is acceptance. So when we experience things that are hard or painful or challenging, like a pandemic, like all the changes we had to go through, uncertainty, oftentimes our impulse is to push back against that thing that's making us uncomfortable. And 2020 and the pandemic brought about a lot of issues that made us really uncomfortable, that were painful, and really threw us out of balance. Through the world, businesses, personal lives, threw us out of balance. So whatever our schedules were like in 2019 were thrown completely out of whack by 2020. So acceptance can really play a big role on how much time we spend in discomfort and how easily we can start to move forward. So one of the things about acceptance is that it helps us to acknowledge and become aware of the facts of reality and takes us out of the powerless position of wishing that things were different. So when we use it as a skill, it's not saying that we like things the way they are, but it's saying, well, these are the facts of the situation. My life feels out of control and out of balance right now. So the sooner we can accept those facts, the sooner we can move forward to making a change. And after we accept the situation, that it is what it is, those emotions that are painful about it, they can tend to cloud our judgment. So when we're able to use acceptance, we're going to be better decision makers in all areas of our lives, like business, family, and self-care. And it can really help decrease our physical and mental stressors that we hold on to when we try to deny reality and that it is what it is. So acceptance is the first step in regaining balance that you want for your life. And I want to cover in the next slide what acceptance is not, because oftentimes there can be kind of this struggle with what acceptance means. So acceptance does not mean that you approve, condone, like, or enjoy your situation, what happened, or what's going on. It does allow you to have some of those uncomfortable emotions, though. It's okay to say, I don't like it, or this hurts and it's painful. But when you accept the situation, it is as it is, your emotions, the intensity and the duration, they're not going to last as long. So it can be a really powerful skill, especially when emotions are high. And acceptance is a choice. It's not a passive process saying, well, it is what it is, but it's recognizing the facts of the situation. So then you can decide what is the next step. So you're able to make more informed decisions and versus making decisions based on what you want the facts to be. So acceptance is a really powerful skill, can oftentimes take a lot of practice. There's a lot of literature out there about it, but it's a skill that I would recommend for sure, especially because imbalance can feel awful. So that's one of the starting skills that I wanted to emphasize on. And so we're going to shift into the next skill. And before we do, wanted to check in, we're going to talk about boundaries. So I want to check in with what you have experienced with boundaries and being a small business owner during COVID. And so Mackenzie and Anne, just checking in to see what you've heard from small business owners or from yourselves that have challenged boundaries over the last year and a half during the pandemic.
So I would say, I think COVID and more or less has been a little bit of an HR nightmare for everybody in the sense that creating boundaries around a pandemic is not something we have in a rule book, in any sort of best practice. And so I think the idea of, especially I felt for myself as a business owner being at home and working, was that it's like my laundry bled into my inbox, which bled into, kids yelling, which bled into homeschool. Nothing felt clear cut. And so I never felt productive. So I think there's a self-deprecation that happened because I didn't feel quite like 100% homeschool mom. I didn't 100% feel like business owner, 100% homemade. Is all these types of things that I felt like especially for myself, I couldn't hold a boundary very well because I felt like it was all just sort of gravel, just like all over the place. So I think the great thing about, especially kind of getting, not, kids are, going back to school, and all those types of things, is there is a sense that their like schedules do matter, and that like timing things and setting aside time to do things is very important. And so I found, even as kind of we come out of this, that, I say, this is when I'm working, and this is when I'm at baseball with my kids, and this, this is dinner, and then we're done for the day. And so I think implementing and upholding is really hard. Creating, or kind of the idea of what I want it to be, it's always easier said than done. So I think that for me has been the struggle in coming out of it, to say, before it was just sort of like I had 100 arms doing a million things, and now I'm trying to be more thoughtful, because that only increases my anxiety, that increases my kind of just thought process that I know isn't healthy. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and especially tricky going from time that's very structured to just like this blob. I remember all the memes where it was like, it's an ongoing Monday for like a year. Anne, did you have a thought that you wanted to?
I would agree with the ongoing Monday. It seems like sometimes the day just doesn't end, even when you walk away from your stuff, because I have a bad habit of not turning off the work cell phone. And so it'll inadvertently, somebody's, some old client is calling to check in on, let me know how they're doing. And I'm, and then I feel that sense of I need to be there for them, and they're not grasping the concept of the time change, or that it's after 5. And so it's just getting them to learn, because I had a couple that were really bad about calling me like after 5 o'clock, and I'm like, it's not, it's not my work day anymore.
Yeah.
So I finally had to tell them, I was like, be mindful of the time when you call me. Yeah. And so then they've gotten to where they'll call me in the middle of the day, which is much better. And then I feel bad. I felt horrible, like if I needed to go out when the pandemic started, and I'm seeing all these small businesses that had been there for years suddenly are closing. And I mean, we've had several down in my part of town just close, and I don't know if they'll reopen. And then going into the Walmart and like realizing, why is there no toilet paper and little things like that, and then freaking out that I don't have enough to hold me over until the next shipment gets in, if it even gets here. And so there's a lot of little just that, and then just staying viable at work, just feeling like I'm necessary. Yeah. And
nothing quite like a pandemic to bring all those little boundaries to the forefront. For sure. So as we move forward, I want to be mindful of time. So one of the things, one of my favorite ways to think about boundaries is that boundaries are like a property line. When you own a piece of property, you know the territory, you're the authority of who's allowed on your property, for how long, and what behavior is permissible. You're responsible for talking to neighbors when their property is on yours, trees, cars, or toys. You're responsible for the upkeep of the property. Even if someone else breaks your window, you have to be the one coordinating, to get it fixed. So I like that idea. That really helps me remember what boundaries are, is that what falls within my property line and what's my responsibility. Because sometimes it feels like there's not much that we can control, and there's really a lot we can't control. But it can also be grounding to come back to the things that we can control and that fall on our property. So emotions, behaviors, choices, attitudes, thoughts, resources are all things that fall on our property. And so sometimes when you're stressed and feel like there's nothing you can do, one of the things I often recommend is coming back to some of these things that we can control, because that's going to help get us back on track and help us remember that we can be actors even when we feel like there's nothing we can do. And boundaries really come from our values and priorities. So that's why when a boundary is crossed, it's so hurtful. So yeah, our boundaries start with our priorities. And so we've kind of been through that with, the steps to gaining balance. But once you notice what your priorities are, that's going to help you set up your boundaries to protect what is important to you. And so boundaries for small businesses, as we move forward, can look really different, because there's not the traditional structures of going out and having a job. They're not already built in. And especially working from home can really cloud the work-life balance. And wearing the hat, kind of Mackenzie, like you said, of all these different things, being a boss, you have to be HR, accountant, customer service, and a partner, a parent, a friend. So even all of these roles can become kind of clouded. So some of these things, some really intentional things can help kind of delineate, some of these different roles and hopefully help with that balance. And especially for this past year, some people are going to go back to work, but there's lots of businesses who are being flexible with the location. And so some people may still be able to work at home. So it's really important to have a designated workspace, to find some way to separate your work from your life space. So some people might have a different room they get to work from. I have a colleague who has a partition that she sets up and then takes down to separate from the rest of her space because she doesn't have a room to do that in. For me personally right now, I don't have a different room. So I work on our dining table, but then at the end of the day, I clean it up and put it somewhere else. And it can make such a difference to have that space be clear. So finding some way to designate a workspace that is just for work, that you're not going to be sitting around or seeing all the time. And then also designated work hours, and then sticking to those work hours. Our brains and bodies need a break from work. Even if you love what you do, we need a break from work. And this can be a lot harder for a small business owner and an employer where you might have a lot more responsibilities than an employee. But it's still important to create a schedule for yourself and to be flexible. It might not always be the same. Some nights you'll have to work late. Some days you'll get to go home early. Excuse me. But in general, to create a schedule that you're going to try and stick to. 5 o'clock is my quitting time, and I'm going to do my best to stick as close as I can to that, knowing that, it's not going to be hard and fast. I also recommend when you're super busy to put it in your calendar or put it in a reminder for meals, because sometimes we skip meals when we're working really hard. Put exercise, put the time you want to go to bed, put time you want to spend with a friend, put all of those things in your calendar as a reminder when you're super busy, so that can start getting worked in and become a habit, especially when you're busy. I also like to recommend that people schedule in self-care as a non-negotiable part of their calendar. That can be a strong boundary, because it's okay to make your well-being a priority. You wouldn't cancel a meeting with an important client, and your body and your mind are important components of who you are. So do your best to not neglect them. Make sure you're getting those needs met too, so you can continue to do the things you love. Do your best not to check in. When you're off the clock, let yourself be off the clock. Trust your employees, trust yourself that you have done what you need to do to enjoy your time away. But allow yourself to take a break from worrying about inventory, finances, schedules. And that might take some practice to take a break from worrying, but it is possible to allow yourself to be away from work. and enjoy the things that are outside of work. So hopefully you're doing something you love and are passionate about. But even when that's the case, it's helpful and important to take a break and engage in other areas of your life as well. Allow your mind to think of things that you don't normally think about, and enjoy things that you don't do every day for work. Because it's a good reminder to help us keep doing the things that we do. To enjoy, we do things so we can enjoy our lives. So we need to engage with those things and remember to take breaks. Like I said, our bodies and our brains, we need breaks from work. So make sure you take that time for yourself, even if it's just 5 minutes. So the next slide, there's just a couple more for boundaries. And I'll go through these pretty quickly because we're almost over on time. Know your limits. Know how long you can work without getting overtaxed. Know your strengths and when you need to delegate. Know your optimal working conditions. These are all things that fall within our property line, within our boundaries. So we need to know our limits, and then we need to voice those. We need to communicate when we need flexibility, when we need help problem solving, or even when we're about in burnout. We need to communicate those things. And it might be helpful to talk about it with a friend or an accountability buddy, especially if you're making changes. So we're almost done, so we'll go to the next slide. Many of you have probably heard of SMART goals, but if you're really wanting to make some changes in work-life balance, this is a way to help realistically plan out the changes that you want to make. The first step is to make a specific goal. I would like to have more balance is too general. I would like to do more physical exercise is more specific, and you can work with that. Pick something that you can measure for how you know when you reach that goal. So I know I've reached my goal when I do a physical activity for 30 minutes, 6 times a week. Make sure it's attainable, and make sure that it's realistic. Maybe 6 times a week isn't realistic. Maybe 3 times a week is a better starting point. And then finally, pick a point where you want to accomplish that goal by. And then, as always, you can adjust these goals as you go, but this can be a really helpful way to start picking out some of those goals you might want to work on. And then the next page. And for those who are employers, thinking about work-life balance for your employees, again, it's not one size fits all. So even the generations we're born in might be affecting our desires for a certain kind of balance. So know what your employees' priorities are. If you have a small enough business, check in with them to see, how their balance is. One of the ways you'll know that they are out of balance is burnout. Burnout is always a boundary issue. So the signs of burnout are difficulty in concentration, irritability, increased absenteeism, slippage in work performance. So if you notice some of these things, it might be an opportunity to check in with them and see if something is feeling out of balance with them. As with everything else, you are the leader and the focal point if you're the employer. So by creating your own healthy boundaries and balance for yourself, you're going to help set a healthy example for your employees. And then flexibility is really important. I think we've learned a lot about that over this last year. So trying to help carry that in as something that we've learned will be important for your employees as well. And then have patience with yourself. If you are working on including balance in your life, have some grace and some patience as we move forward in a post-pandemic world. Every human is still adjusting and experiencing new anxieties and new problems. There's likely to be bumps along the way. So as best you can, give yourself a break and continue to be curious about how you can find balance. And then this final slide just has some of the articles that I used in creating this, if you want some more information about how to get work-life balance. So I had to go a little quick there at the end, but wanted to get all that in there.
Haley, that's so helpful. I think these are really great resources. Is there additional resources that Diversus provides or in the community that you would recommend? Or if they need additional information, is there a good place to do that?
Sure, I would say, it's been a rough year, and we're not even sure how mental health is going to continue to be affected as we move forward. So if you are having a hard time, it's okay to seek support. I mean, that's what Diversus can help provide for the community and even our team. The crisis counseling program isn't, we provide emotional support. So if you want to call and talk to somebody, but don't really want to go to therapy, we're a good option for that. Like, hey, how do I find some of this balance? We can help work with some of those stressors. But I would say noticing some of those symptoms in yourself of burnout and knowing that it's okay to ask for support or help, even if it's just through a small patch, to be kind and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think too, just knowing that we're not alone in this, I think is so important, and staying curious with our emotions and not feeling like we're on an island. I say in every single webinar that behind all businesses are people, and behind people are stories, and our stories really matter as we navigate, and they're also different and nuanced. So thank you so much for bringing light to what a work-life balance means in a post-pandemic world, because again, we're all learning together and we're all doing it for the first time together. And so to lean on each other for support, and then, as Mr. Rogers says, go to the helpers. So the ones that know, and have the education and the background, I think is so critical to the people behind the businesses and the stories that are part of them. So thank you to you both for giving us such rich information. And like I mentioned before, if you want this information, this is part 3 of a 6-part series that we're doing mental health in the workplace and just navigating what that looks like. We will have all the videos be on the website. So if you go to pikespeak.spdc.org, there's more information that you can find if you want the first 2. And then we do have 3 to follow as well. We do it every Wednesday for the next 3 Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. And like I mentioned earlier, the Pikes Peak SBDC does provide free consulting and practical training and business resources for our small business community. So if you have any questions in regards to how we can help your small business in regards to not just startups, but also mature businesses, or more information about this, we're happy to provide that for you as well. And so next, we will be talking about anxiety and stress management in the workplace post-pandemic. So this is something I think we've all felt, as well as some of these other items, but anxiety and depression and all of these words that were used before, but now so much a part of our vernacular as we kind of move forward. And a huge thank you to David Commercial Real Estate for being our presenting sponsor into Diversus. Both of you, Anne and Haley, for doing this for us and outlining all of it. So thank you so much to all of you watching live as well on Zoom. We appreciate you both and Diversus for helping small business navigate the mental health, getting away from stigma and moving towards having great conversations about this and bringing it to light. So thank you again, Haley and Anne.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Until next time, take care.
Thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.